Hi there everybody, welcome to this webinar where I'm going to be looking at enabling self-service analytics with Power BI. Have a look at the agenda. The main rump actually of this webinar is going to be a Power BI demonstration, particularly focused around self-service BI. But I wanted to start off really looking at how I think we got to where we are today with self-serve BI and look at the attributes of a role that I'm calling a citizen data engineer. That's somebody who is going to be building data sets for others to consume. I'll have a brief look at the process that we're going to loop through when delivering a self-service data set, and then after the demo I'll call out some final considerations and bring up some calls to action. Looking at how we got to where we are today, up until certainly the last 10 years, but maybe even the last 5 years, BI and analytics was still being very much built by IT. IT were the data owners. They tended to be building the applications to cope with analytics and BI, and even the reports. And the business was sitting separate to those, and they really were just consumers. And that introduced a gap, and that gap, I think, has caused so many issues that it started to cause a kind of revolution. And those issues were, I think, fundamentally three things. Firstly, there was a need to translate a business requirement for a BI or analytics visualization or analysis into an IT solution. And that quite often included quite a lot of people. You might have had an architect, a data engineer, a business analyst, some people who are going to build the solution, big teams building stuff. It would have got into an IT queue of some sort, and that invariably introduced delays. Those delays caused frustrations. We saw the emergence of Agile as a development methodology to try and overcome some of those delays. But in the end, it's still taking a long time to get information and get an analytics to the users, and quite often by the time they got them, they were obsolete. What happened after that? Well, I think certainly with customers that I've been working with, we quite often saw a kind of a hands up by IT, acknowledging the challenges and saying, we'll give you the data, we'll become the data curators, we'll give you the data, you guys can then do the business modelling, if you like. And it kind of worked to a certain extent, but I think what we often saw was quite a big proliferation of applications, lots of business users building the same thing. I remember having a conversation with a customer once who said, we've got a cottage industry here of people building applications. And there are two challenges with that, I think. One is, clearly, it's a duplication of effort. Secondly, you've got the same logic potentially built into lots of applications, and there's a risk there that people are looking at what they think is the same thing, but actually it might be different. So that model kind of was caused some challenges and stopped working very well. And so the model that we're seeing more and more at customers is one where somebody is sitting between IT and the business, and I've given them the title Citizen Data Engineer. They're somebody from the business, but they're doing a lot of that data engineering role. What they're not doing is trying to pre-guess and build the reports. Those do still sit with the business. But what they are doing is doing the data extraction, the data modeling, building all of those KPIs and additional things. So there's only one person building that, and then the business can consume it as a data set. And that's the model we're going to look at over the next 30 minutes. So what are the attributes of a citizen data engineer? Well, they certainly need to be business focused. They need to be looking at being able to answer a raft of questions that the business might want to ask. They're not trying to prejudge those questions and build reports, but they're trying to identify what the questions might be so they can get the data in order to fulfill those questions. But at the same time, they need to be pretty data literate. They've got to be building data models. They've got to be understanding how to build calculations, how to build hierarchies. So they do need quite a strong element of data literacy. I've also got two attributes, if you like, that are slightly softer down the bottom, but I think no less important. I think there needs to be a strong empathy between the citizen data engineer and the users that he's building the data sets for. I think I've put their little image. They need to get inside the head of their users because they need to think how their users will look at the data, not how they look at the data. I don't know about you, but when I'm building something, if it's just for me, I'm quite happy to cope with some names that look a bit silly or some calculations that aren't quite formatted right. But if I'm building something to share, then it's got to be understood and easily used by lots of people. And finally, I think they need to be responsible, because what we're doing here is we're giving a member of the business team the authority to publish data and effectively say this data is correct. You can use this data. I'm happy with it. And so there's an element of responsibility there. They need to be confident in the data, confident it's right, confident that the security is right, that they're not sharing stuff with a wide group of people that maybe should be under greater control, confident that it's being refreshed whenever it needs to be. So there is an element of responsibility that comes with this role that citizen data engineer really needs to take up. And in terms of the process for delivering data sets to a wider audience, I've got 6 activities here, and I'll go around it quite quickly because really I want to spend the majority of the time today looking at how this might pan out in reality using Power BI. But the first task is obviously to scope the data set that they're going to be building. Ask a lot of questions of the business, try and understand the questions that people might want to answer from the data. I mean, it might be from one data source, it might be from multiple data sources, but we're trying to establish what are the metrics or the facts that people want to report. I want to look at share, I want to look at volume, value, those are the facts. What are the dimensions or the attributes? What am I looking at those facts by? I want to look at share by customer, or I want to look at price by item. So what are the dimensions that the analyses are going to be carried out by? What hierarchies do people want to use? Quite often, particularly with CPG and external data, there'll be many, many hierarchies. It's going to make this data set usable to a much broader range of people. We have a number of customers who work with single data sets that support maybe customer analytics, category analytics, brand analytics. And the great thing about that is if they're all using the same data set, then they'll all get the same answer, albeit they're cutting it in a different way using maybe different hierarchies and different dimensions. I need to know what the KPIs are. I want me as a data engineer to be the single source of where those KPIs are built so that I know that when everybody uses them, they're going to be using the same definition. And I need to think about perspectives. Is there a security aspect to this? Do certain people need to see certain sections of the data and others other sections? So lots of considerations around the scope. Once I've done that, I can start to try and source that information. Where can I find it? Where is it? Is it in the cloud? Is it on-prem? What technology is it using? Is it in a database, a data lake, a spreadsheet? Could be in many, many sources. What's the granularity in that source? I might have weekly data in one source and daily data in another, and I need to make sure that those two things will mash together. How often must this be updated to keep it relevant for everybody? If there's daily data, it probably needs to be updated every day, even though some users are only looking at monthly figures. And as I say, I need to be clear on the definition of those KPIs. So quite a lot around the sourcing of the information, and once I've got all that, I can move into the construction phase or the build phase and start to build my Power BI data set. And I'm going to go through most of these actually in a demo, so I'm not going to detail them. The one that might look a bit odd there is apply cosmetics, and it sounds superficial, but I think it's really important. It's the stage you go through, making sure that you've got this empathy with your users, you're in their head, and what they see is familiar to them, it makes sense to them, it's easy to use, all of those sort of aspects. So don't forget the cosmetic side of things. The verify stage is an interesting one because we've moved a lot of the responsibility for delivering from IT to the business. When we had that IT business relationship, there was most times a kind of formal user acceptance test phase where the IT team would say, we're done, business, you tell us it's okay. And once that had happened, IT could stand back and the business then took responsibility for it. Sometimes with citizen data engineer type data sets, you might forget that actually you are still responsible for making sure that that data is correct because it's going to be used by a whole raft of people. So you do need to make sure it's accurate, it's usable, and it's complete. And the best way to do that is still probably to get a group of users from your organisation and share it with them and talk them through it. So really important step. It isn't a case of I've built it, I've published it, because otherwise the buck has to stop with the person publishing the data set. At that point we can publish, and there's a number of activities, sort of technical activities if you like, publishing it, setting up user access, the refresh schedule, all of those sort of things. The last one there's an interesting one, endorsement. How are you going to make your consumers of your data know how confidently they can use this data? And we'll have a look at some of the things in Power BI where we can endorse data. And then the final stage, not to be forgotten, is monitoring. So once it's up there, how well is it being used? Review the usage, see who's using it. Go and talk to users, get feedback from them. Talk to people who aren't using it, actually, probably as important. Identify new needs. It probably isn't the case that this data set will be put up there and never change. And if you want to keep something being used, you need to ensure that it's relevant, up to date. It might need another source of data putting in there. It might need a different hierarchy building. So keep the needs of the business front of mind and keep updating that model. What I'm going to do now is a demo to show you how Power BI can sort of enable this citizen data engineer. And I've already done the first two steps, and this is really simple because I haven't got much time during the webinar. So forgive me for my simplicity of my model. But I've been out and I've talked to my users. I've seen a need for sales data, both online sales data and store data, people wanting to analyse share by product category, for example, and by week, really looking at change. I mean, these sort of questions are really relevant today, actually. If you think about online sales, for a lot of retailers, they've gone through the roof and they're really struggling to cope, and trying to understand really where sales are going in this changing world is super important. But also looking at maybe price by store. Again, supply chains have completely changed how they're operating, and being able to have a look at price impacts by store can be really, really relevant. So lots of business questions. In reality, I'd have canvassed lots of people and got lots of questions. I've picked two. And I found that the data to support those two questions is held in an on-premises data warehouse. It's SQL Server. In reality, I might find that it's in 3 different sources, and I might need to mash those together or blend them. The data's by store, item, day for store level data, and week for online. It's updated daily. And I've got a couple there of KPIs, very simple KPIs that I need to calculate. Online share, which is my online quantity over my total quantity, and my average in-store price, which is value over volume. So, really simple model. In reality, you'd have spent probably a number of days or weeks trying to frame your particular data set. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tab over to Power BI and see how we might start to set this up. There are 2 flavours of Power BI. There's a desktop version and there's a server version. And if you're going to be a data engineer, you really need the desktop version, because the desktop version is the model that you can do all of your data loading, data modelling, things like that. The server version is fine for report creation, so your users may well only ever use the server version, but you as a data engineer will need the desktop version. This is Power BI Desktop. It's a download, so you download it from the Microsoft website. It's a free download, and it remains free. You can download it and use it. There's no trial period or anything like that. And it's got 3 tabs. It's got a report tab, a data tab, and a model tab. The report tab is primarily, whether we're on the desktop or the server version, is going to be used by the users building reports. They've got all these funky visualizations that they can use, lots of things they can do. And I'm not really interested in that. I'm more interested in the data and the data model. What I'm going to do first off is I'm going to get some data. Microsoft Power BI has a really, really rich set of data sources that I can pull from in the cloud, Azure and other things, SharePoint, Salesforce, things like that. But it can also talk to on-premises data, and I'm going to pick my data up from a SQL Server database. Long list of where I could get data from. I'm going to get it from a database, and it's going to be SQL Server. I can connect to the database. Now this is where I've probably had to go to IT and get some information on where the data is, what the database name is, get myself a login. In my particular instance we're doing today, I'm going to use a local copy on my machine. I have to make decisions like whether I'm going to import the data or I'm going to query it directly. Power BI allows you to either bring the data into your workbook and publish it in the workbook. Really good performance if you do that, but some constraints on the size of the workbook. Or you can use the direct query alternative. Every time a user brings a new piece of information onto the report, Power BI will go back and query that. Really good for real-time or close to real-time analytics, and also for large data sets. But I'm going to import, so Power BI is going to go off and see which databases I can connect to, and it's giving me 3, and I've already identified that the information I need is in this retail link database. I'm going to pick now the tables I want to bring into my data set, so I'm going to bring in online sales, and there was also a store element, what people wanted to look at, and they wanted to look at it by product, by store, and by time. In fact, you probably look at this from a size perspective and say, well, actually, I'll bring quite a few tables in. Might not have recognised the need for them at the moment, but as long as space and performance was okay, it then opens up the capabilities of your data set to maybe some other queries. But for now, I'll just bring those 5 in. Every time I click on one, I get a preview, and I can just see that that is what I want. I could load it straight in, but I'm going to transform it just to make sure that it's what I need. And I can do some, effectively, some ETL, some transformation and loading, but it's really easy point and click. And I've got some guidelines here. I want to get rid of anything that I really don't need, if there's anything in there that the business will never want. And I need to just make sure that everything is in the right sort of format. So I can see here that I've got an IT key here. Nobody's going to need that, so I'm going to take it out, reduce the size, make everything a bit more manageable. And I can also see that what Power BI has done is it's seen an item number, but because it's all numeric, it's considered that to be a number, and I can tell that because it's right justified it. But I don't want Power BI to start adding those things together. So for any items like that, I'm just going to make sure that my users don't get confused and think they can add those together. I'm just going to make them all text. Similarly with week, I think that should probably be a text number. My quantity looks all right, sales, an order flag, and a date. Happy with that. Store sales, again, I've got one of these IT keys. Nobody's going to need to see that. My item number needs to be text. My store number, similarly, is text. And it's taken me a little while to do this, but as I do it, Power BI is building up some steps. And every time I refresh this data set, it will rerun through those steps. So unlike Excel, where you have to kind of do the same thing again every time, Power BI will do it for you. You do it once, it does it every time. My item table, again, my item number needs to be text. And I can see things like there's a whole load of blanks. Maybe an aniseed board doesn't have an item size, but I don't want my users to lose that piece of information. So what I'm going to do is use one of the many ETL capabilities in Power BI. I'm going to use the replace values, and I'm going to replace blanks with NAs. And as I say, what will happen now is that every time this is loaded, if a blank item size comes in, it'll go into that NA bucket, and I know that nothing gets lost. And I could go through the other columns and do similar. I can see that actually there's 2 pieces of information here that look very similar to me. One's just got the number on the end. I think that would be more useful to users, so I think I'll just get rid of that column. I could leave it in, but I'm just trying to neaten stuff up so that it's easy to use. And I've got a lat long. I quite like that. Somebody might want to do some geospatial, so I'm going to leave that in. And similarly time. My week, I think I made text, so there we go. All good to go, and I can now close and apply. Now that will load into Power BI, and the first thing I need to do is have a look at my model to see whether it's a good, solid model where all my pieces of information are correctly linked. And Power BI will have done an awful lot of that for me. I go and look at my model that Power BI has built for me. I can see that it's actually managed to do quite a lot of links, so it's identified that both store sales and online sales have an item. For each item in the list, there are many sales items in both tables. Similarly, for my store sales, there's a link to store, and for time, it's identified the link at the daily level. It hasn't identified at the weekly level, so I'm just going to build that in. and it's actually going to tell me there's a bit of a problem. I'm not going to resolve it on this webinar because we haven't got time, but what it's saying is I've got a many-to-many. There's many weeks in the timetable because each 7 days will have a record, and there's many weeks in the sales. And I can go and resolve that doing a bit of data modelling, but I won't bother. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at that. I said I wasn't really interested in the report tab, but I'm going to look at this because I'm going to now put on my hat as a user and see whether everything makes sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a data grid on the screen. So this might be what my users would be doing. But I'm going to maybe look at categories, and I'm going to look at online quantity and online sales, and maybe sales units. So I can see my 3 measures. Now that was a bit awkward. I had to try and find my facts within a whole list of other attributes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up this panel a bit. I'm going to think about my users, and I'm going to rename my 2 fact tables. I'm just going to put an underscore at the beginning. And what that's done is it's brought my 2 facts to the top of the screen. And that's really useful for users because they can see everything, all the facts are together. I want to look at volume, value, growth, etc. By, look at this, by that. There's other cleaning up I can do. If I look at online sales, I can see that all of the link fields are in the online sales, but they're also in the reference tables. For example, item number appears in online sales and in the item table. So good practice says, let's keep in my fact tables only stuff that are facts. I'll hide everything else. I'm not deleting it, I'm just hiding it. So my online sales now is just a simple list of facts. And if I look at my item, I can see my items, and I know, for example, that my business like a category hierarchy, so I can start to build that. So I build it once, they consume it. Category, maybe going down to brand, finally, item. So I've built a little hierarchy so that I know drilling will work and really help with this analysis. Tidy as well, I actually like to put my hierarchies at the top of the list, simply because I might have 5 or 6 hierarchies, and I think it's quite useful to keep them all together. The last thing I'm going to do very quickly is just build a calculation, a KPI. I can do that, and I'm going to create that online share calculation. What I do here is use a language called DAX. It's not bad. I think it's probably equivalent to the sort of scripting language within Excel once you get used to it, but it's going to be the sum of online quantity divided by the sum of online quantity plus the sum of store units day. That's my measure. And now that calculation will work because it's a measure within my model. It will work whether I'm looking at the top, at the bottom, down at detailed granular level. I didn't quite like the way that had a very odd name, so I'm going to go in and rename my sales units day to store sale, or store quantity, I think. I'm doing a whole load of stuff really to help users use the model. It's user-friendly, and there's my measure. And there's probably a lot more I need to do. I probably need to make that store quantity, have a comma in it, for example. I can just do a bit of cosmetics, maybe my online share. Really, I want that to be seen as a percentage rather than decimal. Lots of other things I should really do, probably add some currency to the value, except take the decimal places off the online quantity. But you can see the sort of thing that I'm doing. Once I'm happy with it, at that point I can then publish this so that other users within my organisation who I allow to see it can see it. So I'm going to publish this. I'm going to call it retail sales for now. And Power BI now is going to ask me where I want to put it, because Power BI server has lots of workspaces where I can save data. I've set one up for my users, and it's called Sales Datasets, and that's where I'm going to put this dataset. Power BI is now publishing it, and probably I'd publish it and give access to it to just a few users for them to test first. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over to the server, the service, if you like, the Power BI service. And what we can see, this is the sales data set, and we can see now just popped up is that retail sales item that I have put up here. And I can do a number of things with it. I can set up a gateway. If it needs to be refreshed, I need a gateway. That's something, connection to that on-prem database. I want to schedule it. I don't want every day to have to go in and do this myself. Once I've built the data set, I want to be hands-off. So I could go in and maybe schedule it at a particular time. And I can endorse it. I can either say to people who are going to consume this that it's just a default data set, or once I've got those users to do my kind of mini UAT, I could maybe promote it and give a bit of a promoted badge. I could certify it if it was real gold standard, and I can apply that. Now I can give access to my users. So I'm going to give them access to the data set. We can see it's got the little promoted badge. I'm going to go, and if I just, by the way, flick over to Edge here, I can see that as a user at the moment, I can see that information, but I won't be able to build on it yet until the system data engineer, I've actually managed permissions on it. And I'm going to use this user 10 as my second example. They're going to be this probably would be a group in reality. It'd be something like your account managers or your category managers. And I'm going to allow them to build reports using this data set. Once I've done that, if I go back, and I'll just refresh this once more because they can now use it to build. If I go to my workspace, I'm going to start to build a report for me. So now I get a little create option. I'm going to create a report, and there's that retail sales that's just been promoted, and that's the one that I'm going to use. I know it's a good one because it's got a promoted endorsement, which is good. And I don't actually even have to go into the desktop version. I can just sit in the browser version and build exactly the same visual that we saw being built on the desktop. And what's carried through is any of the formatting, any of the hierarchies, any of the things that my citizen data scientists built in for me to use. So they've built a really solid data set that's available for me to do whatever analysis I want. I'm not constrained by IT-based reports. If I save this, just so it's clear, if I go back to my other browser, so this is me now as the person who's published the data set, one of the things that I can do is I can view related, and I can see who's using it, and there appears this report, and I can see that it's by that user 10, and that's the name of the report. And that's really useful for me to be able to go and talk to people about how they're using the data, problems they have, things that they might need. That was really, really whistle-stop, but I'm conscious of the time, so I'm really just going to go back to my slides and just cover off a few considerations. The first one really is around the size limitations of Power BI. So you are limited to about 1 gigabyte of data on an import, or if you have the premium version. Power BI has two versions. It has a pro version and a premium. Premium is really for organisations that have really embraced Power BI, and it's based on a server rather than an individual. You can go up to 10 gig. An individual user by default only has 10 gig of workspace. So if you're a citizen data engineer, you need to keep an eye on that. I think you can get that increased, but by default it's 10 gig. And by default your workspace is 100 gig as well. So some constraints there. I think that's pretty generous. Most data sets that we're talking about here, that would be fine. One of the constraints that is, I think, has more of an impact at the moment is that as of today, users can only access one Power BI dataset per report. So as a user, I can't take that dataset that I put up there and blend it with other information. And I think that's quite a key thing that I might want to do. Microsoft have it on their enhancement list. It's currently slated for September 2020. It's called Composite Models over Power BI. So you can Google that and keep getting an update on it. I think that will be a pretty big game changer actually when that comes in. There are some security issues. For example, security only applies to viewers. So if you want people to be able to contribute data sets and use your data sets, the security model won't work in that scenario. So you need to think of other options there. We did see that there's no folder structure in Power BI. So if I go back here, you can see that under my workspaces, it's just an alphabetic list. Under my reports and datasets, it's just an alphabetic list. A little bit frustrating. It would be really quite nice to see some structure there. And finally, we could see who's using that data set. That was quite useful, but it wasn't the most comprehensive analysis. There's really neat report usage analysis in Power BI, but as far as I can see, to get a data set and analytics, I think you'd have to use the API and really dig into the background to see if you could find some more information on that. So, what are the calls to action here? Well, I think if you're interested in becoming a citizen data engineer, one way of starting off is to attend the Microsoft Dashboard in a Day sessions. They're run throughout the year, and they cover, a big chunk of it is covering the data modelling side. So I think it would be a very valuable thing to do. Keep up with the Power BI updates. New features come in every month, so something that maybe wasn't there one month may come in and it may really help you. We, Thorogood, run a series of webinars looking at the features. We run them about quarterly, but we cover the last 3 months worth of updates. So that's quite useful because you may have had a blocker that's been released. As I say, that multiple data sets one for me is a real biggie. And the final call to action really is don't forget to focus on governance and empowerment. It's all well and good publishing a data set up to a server, but it's not going to be used unless people know it's there, they're familiar with it, they feel comfortable using it. So really think about empowerment. And on our website, there's a case study around empowering self-service BI, which is well worth a read to understand the sort of things that you need to focus on. So there are 3 links. They're all under the Perspectives access on our website, events, webcasts and case studies. If anybody needs to know any more information on that or anything about Thorogood, we're an independent company focusing on analytics and BI, based in both North and South America, London in Europe, and Bangalore and Singapore in Asia. And we cover the whole range of analytic and BI activities from roadmaps, design, application build, training and support. If you're interested in any of those or anything that's come out in the webinar today, do get in touch. My name's on the screen. But I hope you've found the session useful and it's kind of inspired you to start doing some citizen data engineering. Thank you very much for listening.